Good evening. Welcome to the 10th event in our public lecture series on the Wisconsin idea, past and present. Probably don't need to remind anybody in this room that today is election day and that polls are open till 8 p.m. So if you haven't voted yet, you still have time. Please go vote. This lecture series is part of a new course that is being taught for the first time this fall under the auspices of the Department of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name is Chad Allen Goldberg. I'm a professor in the sociology department, and I have the honor to serve as the instructor for the course this semester. The Wisconsin idea has always been about more than training students for the workforce. It meant, as Adlai Stevenson once put it, a faith in the application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society, the aspiration to light the way of Wisconsin's citizens and government with the best torches of knowledge and understanding that their university can provide. Accordingly, this lecture series and the course with which it is associated aim to bring students, staff, and faculty in the UW system into a broad conversation with the citizens of the state about how the knowledge produced at the University of Wisconsin has benefited the public in the past and can continue to do so today. I encourage you to participate actively through our course website, www.wiscidea.com, and our Facebook page. If you are live tweeting this or subsequent lectures, please use the hashtag #WiscIdea. The Sociology Department is offering this course with limited resources from our academic and supplies and expenses budget. If you would like to contribute to this project to allow us to offer real-time broadcasts or otherwise improve our offerings this semester or in the future, please consider making a contribution to the Department of Sociology Annual Fund. You can do that through the course website. We are fortunate to continue our series tonight with a lecture by Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab on the future of Wisconsin public higher education with a focus on college affordability. Like all of our speakers, she is graciously donating her time and expertise free of charge out of a commitment to public service. From 2004 to 2016, Sara Goldrick-Rab was a professor in educational policy studies and sociology here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she founded the Wisconsin Hope Lab, the nation's only translational research laboratory seeking ways to make college more affordable. The recent weakening of tenure at the University of Wisconsin induced her to move to Temple University in 2016, where she is now professor of higher education policy and sociology. Dr. Goldrick-Rab's commitment to scholar activism is evidenced by her broad profile of research and writing, dissecting the intended and unintended consequences of the College for All movement in the United States. In more than a dozen experimental, longitudinal, and mixed method studies, she has examined the efficacy and distributional implications of financial aid policies, welfare reform, transfer practices, and a range of interventions aimed at increasing college attainment among marginalized populations. She provides extensive service to local, state, and national communities, working directly with governors and state legislators to craft policies to make college more affordable, collaborating with nonprofit organizations seeking to examine the effects of their practices, and providing technical assistance to congressional staff, think tanks, and membership organizations throughout Washington, D.C. Many professional organizations and foundations have honored Dr. Goldrick-Rab for her work. In 2013, she was invited to testify before the United States Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, chaired by Senators Tom Harkin and Lamar Alexander. In 2014, she received the Early Career Award from the American Educational Research Association. And in 2015, she received the William T. Grant Foundation's Faculty Scholars Award. This year, Politico magazine named her among the top 50 people shaping American politics, and Education Week ranked her the 13th most influential U.S. educational policy scholar. Dr. Goldrick-Rab is widely published in venues such as Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, Sociology of Education, Review of Educational Research, and Teachers College Record. She is a co-author of Putting Poor People to Work, How the Work First Idea Eroded College Access for the Poor, published by the Russell Sage Foundation in 2006. In 2014, Harvard Education Press released her co-edited book, Reinventing Financial Aid, Charting a New Course to College Affordability. And she is the author of this book, Paying the Price, College Costs, Financial Aid, and the Betrayal of the American Dream, published by the University of Chicago Press in September 2016. For those of you who are interested in buying copies of the book, we have a table outside with a local bookstore, a room of one's own, which is selling copies of the book. The book has already received positive reviews in the New York Review of Books, Times, Higher Ed UK, Kirkus, the Library Journal, Inside Higher Ed, and elsewhere. And on September 27th, it was featured on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Drawing on an unprecedented study of 3,000 young adults who entered public colleges and universities in Wisconsin in 2008 with the support of federal aid and Pell Grants, the book reveals the devastating effects that ensue when college becomes too expensive and the confusing mix of federal, state, institutional, and private financial aid leaves students without the resources they need to pay for it. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sara Goldrick-Rab.
Well, thank you all for being here. If you haven't voted, kindly leave and go vote, because I don't know if we'll be done. Although actually the polls are open till 8. So actually, no, you can stay and then please go vote. I'm really not kidding. So many people have been asking me as I've been traveling around the country, what can I do to make college affordable? And I've had to stop and say, look, vote. You cannot save enough money to make college affordable. I'm going to take this down, sorry. This is too distracting for me. I mean, it's nice and everything, and books are good. So you can't save your way out of this one. This is just too difficult, and only by voting and changing policies and practices like those that I'm going to talk about tonight can you really do something about this. So this just could not be a bigger honor to be here. I didn't actually, when I was originally invited, know I'd be speaking on Election Day. It's just how things have turned out, but it seems rather appropriate. I also just want to say that it's very strange to be standing back on this campus and giving a lecture after such a short time away. I got to spend the morning in Milwaukee, which is the other place I feel like is home, and it's good to be here. My children miss this state tremendously. I do as well, and I'm really glad to see members of the Hope Lab here in the audience. I want to tell you, though, I spent the whole day talking today with our board about the future of the Wisconsin Hope Lab. So the thing goes on. Okay, but let's talk about the future of Wisconsin public higher education. The story that I tell in this book, Paying the Price, is a story that comes entirely and originally from this state. And most importantly, to me, it comes from this state's students. Okay, I think that one of the biggest problems we have in policymaking is that it is often misaligned with the needs of the people it aims to serve. And that is so true in higher education, which I believe in many cases has policies that were crafted with other interests in mind, not necessarily grounded in the experiences of the students themselves and their needs. So I start with all of my research and with all of my speaking about the students. And so tonight I will start with Ian. Ian Williams is a young man who grew up in the city of Milwaukee. We met him for the first time in 2008. And we began this study, which I'll describe more in a moment. We began by asking students, why are you here? In other words, why did you come to college? And this was Ian Williams's response. He described a feeling like when he was in high school that he thought he would want to go to college. He always kind of thought it would be the right thing to do, but he was never quite sure how it would happen. He kind of worried that all he would be able to do was get out of high school. And I mean, heck, that's an achievement. You know, he went to the Milwaukee Public Schools, which many of us know have so many challenges, like so many schools across this country. He was thinking, you know what, if I get that done, then I'll probably just go get a job and I'll start paying my mom's bills. And I think this is so important that not only was Ian concerned with the economics, but as Chad said, this is about so much more than just the economics. What Ian wanted to be able to do was to care for his family. And this isn't somebody who had children of his own yet, or a family, or was talking about the wife or partner he wanted to care for. He was talking about taking care of his mom. And this is something we heard over and over again among students here, first in Wisconsin, and then I can also assure you around the country. This is not a uniquely Midwestern thing to care for your family, but it is also not only the province of older students. These are young folks trying to get ahead. Here's Alicia. Alicia was another young woman also in the city of Milwaukee, not far away from where Ian grew up. And when she described why she wanted to go to college and what being in college would mean to her, this was also about freedom. This was also about the fear that she would be constrained in ways throughout her life in the way that her mother had been. And it's really an interesting thing to be talking about this, frankly, on a night when we might elect the first woman president. Because what she just said, right, what she said was that she didn't want to have to depend on a man to take care of her daughter and herself. Not now and not in the future, and that's what had happened to her mother. So part of what she was looking for was not just economic security, but it was freedom. So students come to college from all over the United States with these ideas in mind, and they are driven in very large numbers in a way that they didn't used to be, right? So this figure is actually kind of stunning, that 3/4 of students from low-income families who are in 9th grade around the country there's sociologists in the room, not just aspire, not just hope, but expect to go to college. And there is that distinction. Even more of them aspire to it. They expect to go to college. So what happens next? Well, we know that some of them will never make it out of high school. And that remains a serious issue, even at a time when high school graduation rates are higher than ever. Inequality in those rates persists. So let's not brush it aside, but let's intentionally set it aside for a moment. And just consider what happens if they do make it to high school graduation. It is still the case that despite all of this talk, that we've done our job with college access and no longer need to worry about expanding who goes to college. Despite that talk, 1 in 2 of those low-income students doesn't enroll in college. And I don't mean, frankly, whether they make it to UW-Madison or Harvard or Princeton or Temple. I'm talking about any kind of college. They don't make it to a 2-year rate. They don't make it to a for-profit. They don't get anywhere. And if they do enroll, their prospects of actually completing a degree are less than 50% of any kind within 6 years. Okay? It's not good. And to put a finer point on it, the question is, how is it possible that all of these people from low-income families are going to college and wanting this, having really good reason to be there? And we're pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars into financial aid to help them, and yet they're still not making it. Okay? It is not, I want to correct a major misperception, it is not from lack of spending money. We do spend money on this issue, and we spend money here in Wisconsin on this issue. But what financial aid promises, which is that it will make college affordable, it just falls apart when the rubber hits the road. And that's what these students in Wisconsin taught me. So what the heck is going on? Well, we wanted to know this, and we had a really pressing reason. I'm not going to give you the full backstory on this, but I know many of you in the room might have heard of the Fund for Wisconsin Scholars and of John and Tasha Morgridge. Very important to this institution. They created a program that created an impetus for us to undertake this study. Basically, we wanted to know if their latest philanthropic investment would bear the fruit that they were hoping for. If they funded more students to go to college, would those students in fact complete college because they had given them more money? Pretty basic question, pretty meaningful to folks who just invested $175 million in the strategy. Okay? So I'm very grateful for the fact that because they believe in UW-Madison and because they believe in the mission here of research, they also decided to add a scientific component to their philanthropic giving and allow my team to go along for the ride as they set out to support more students in Wisconsin public higher education. So we engaged with 3,000 students who attended all 42 public 2-year and 4-year colleges and technical colleges in this state. Statewide. This was not a UW-Madison study, although UW-Madison was included. We went corner to corner. There was a student in their program from every single county in the entire United States. And they all became part of this study. And we're very grateful to them because they joined with us to help us see what college was like for them in Wisconsin public higher education. We weren't merely able to access their administrative records and the sorts of data points that typical policy analysts would look at. They also engaged with us by answering surveys that we sent them. And I don't mess around when it comes to surveys, okay? When we sent out surveys, we're talking about more than 20 pages of paper with about 100 questions, asking you all kinds of things about your life. Would you believe that on the first survey we sent to these low-income individuals, 75% of them responded? Okay? I think we did some incredible things that made this happen, frankly. And I think it took a ton of work, and I give a lot of credit to my team. Well, first was very simple. There was $5 in the envelope, and the promise of $20 if they did it. Okay? It cost real money. But secondly, we did something that made it matter to them. We made a pitch to them that in this day and age, by telling us about their experiences in college as financial aid recipients, they would help to make financial aid count. That promise to them was not a clear promise. It's not clear what that means, right? But it is a major reason that I am out there now with this book trying to spread the message of what they taught us. Because to make financial aid count means to make it align with the needs of those students. So we did these surveys. We also did interviews. There were 50 of the 3,000 students. There's a complicated process for how they were all selected, but it wasn't as if we simply picked the ones who we thought would make our case look good. Far from it. And 50 of these students met with us at least once a year, often every semester, for up to the next 6 years. And they met with us even when they were no longer enrolled in college. And that's something that most of the colleges and universities around here never get to do. Right? Once a student leaves campus, we call them a dropout, and we essentially write them off as no longer part of our agenda. We learn a ton from talking to people who have actually left higher education. So here's the thing. Every single one of these students got a federal Pell Grant. And if you're not familiar with the federal Pell Grant, you need to get to know it because it is the centerpiece of the entire financial aid system. Senator Claiborne Pell said something very similar to something that Bill Sewell once said, there's a building named after for on campus. As the president of the American Sociological Association, Bill Sewell said that one's family income should not determine one's chances of completing college. Shouldn't, but clearly did. When he's writing in 1972, boy oh boy did it. Pell said we can break that link by providing grants targeted to those who need it and taking the cost of college off the table as a contributing factor. Now, I could show you a graph that is shown in many places, including the New York Times, that shows you that today, family income determines college attainment more than it did at the time that the Pell Grant was created. So that's quite disturbing. But for these students, the Pell is supposed to cover their cost of attendance. And it focuses on them. It focuses on them. And what that means is that people get the impression that because these students are getting grants, they're the ones who are okay. It's the middle class that's being left out, we tell ourselves. They're the ones who are getting loans. And that is unfair. But at least, essentially, those kids are all right. The question is, are they? If so many of them are getting this Pell Grant, then why is it that so many of these people are leaving school? Well, one main reason is that the Pell Grant doesn't cover the cost of college. Now, I'm going to show you this in wonky terms first. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you that we spend, is this working? Yeah, sort of. Okay, well, so I'll do it with colors. So the first thing I want you to look at is the dark blue line, the one that goes up, 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 up. Okay? And that is the line about how much money we spend on the Pell Grant, right? So we spend a lot of money. In fact, during the recession, we spent more and more. And why did we do that? Because more people needed a Pell Grant. More people were deemed eligible for a Pell Grant. There were a lot of things going on with that, including some changes that I called him the last president. President Obama put into place. The last president. So it's an entitlement program. What that means is more people are eligible, then more people get it. It doesn't matter. This grant in this state, called the Wisconsin grant, real complicated, it's not an entitlement. That should not be a surprise. What that means is that while more people would be eligible, we would graph the number of eligible students, the number of the dollars going to them and the number of people getting it would not increase. Make sense? There's a finite pot of money, and if it starts to run under how many people are eligible for it, then people simply don't get it. But the Pell program, you get it. What that means is that DC policymakers started to freak out when that number, right, the amount of money that the Pell Grant is costing started to approach $40 billion a year. And they started saying all kinds of things like, what's going on in that program? People cheating in that program? Students signing up and not completing college? What a waste. And they started raising questions. Maybe it's ineffective. Maybe we should cut it. Maybe we should do something else. Okay? That's part of the political dynamic of what happens to these entitlement programs, especially when not everybody is bought into them. And there's a lot of people who aren't really bought into these programs. Because look, at the meantime, while that recession is happening and while college prices are going up, right, in the 90s and the 2000s, what you see there on the bottom is that the maximum Pell Grant and the average Pell Grant amounts were not rising. So while Washington's fighting over a program that it thinks is getting more expensive because people must be getting more from it, the effective purchasing power of the financial aid that is being provided by the Pell is going down. In other words, the Pell as a fraction of the cost of attending college for a year, the thing it's supposed to cover 100% of, right, was falling. And it has been falling since the time the program was created, to the point that today, that Pell Grant that's supposed to make college affordable covers about 60% of the cost of attending a public university, and covers about, a third of the cost of attending a public university, and covers about 60% of the cost of attending a community college. Okay, now, that's not a new chart. I'm not the first one to talk about this by any stretch of the imagination. But let me give you a sense of what that feels like to a student. So, has anybody ever bought a Groupon? Okay, so more and more people are, and one of the purposes of the whole Groupon idea is to get you to try businesses and products that you wouldn't otherwise normally choose, right? Maybe you always thought you wanted to go to L'Etoile, but I mean, who's kidding who, right? Who has that kind of money? So you magically one day are swiping through and you find a Groupon for L'Etoile, and it says, you're gonna get 75% off at L'Etoile. And you're like, wow, that I can do. That's something I've always wanted to do. Let me get my partner, let's go to dinner. We go to dinner, we sit down and get the menu, pick out some entrees, maybe get something a little more expensive than you would even normally get because you're getting this great discount. And the server brings the dish and you start eating and you think, man, this is great. I really like it. I heard L'Etoile was good. Now it's really good. And you're eating it and you're really enjoying it. And then the waiter happens to walk by the table and he says, by the way, just want to be clear, you're not going to use a Groupon to pay for this, are you? Because there was a misprint in the Groupon. Well, it's not 75% off, it's 25% off. I'm sure you're fine with that, of course. You could just put on your credit card or something. Except you don't have a credit card, right? Because like so many folks, frankly, no, you don't have a credit card. What are you going to do? You have a problem. You can maybe offer to wash dishes, except they have plenty of low-wage dishwashers happening back there, and they don't need another one. You could dine and dash, but you're not going to feel very good about it. You can't give back the food you already ate, and you liked it. Okay? This is how they feel. And it's a lot bigger deal, frankly, than not being able to finish the entree at L'Etoile. Because you've been told that if you don't finish that entree, you're never going to be a middle-class person in this country and have any kind of economic stability. Okay? The subtitle of my book talks about the betrayal of the American dream, not to be dramatic, but because the students were literally talking about feeling betrayed. So let's drill down to some numbers. I really want this to hit home, okay? So Ian Williams, the student I introduced you to before, he grew up in a house of 5 kids with a single mom in Milwaukee. Okay? This is the poster child for the Pell Grant, right? This is somebody who there's really no question we all believe shouldn't be able to afford college by himself, and we're gonna help him. It's gonna be affordable. All right, so that's the family's income in 2008. You can see it's about $25,000. And once he does that wonderful experience of the thing called the FAFSA, that I'm sure you all have done and thoroughly enjoyed. Has anybody done the FAFSA? Right, small American bureaucratic tragedy all its own. Once he does that and gets the big gold star, he's given a formula that says, okay, so you owe $425 a year for your college because that's what the federal government says your family can manage, okay? And we could argue over whether that's the right percentage of the income or whatever, but $425 is what we decided he could pay. Now, his public university, and I'm not naming names here, but the public university nearest his home on a bus line from his house, the only one within an hour drive, right? It charged over $17,000 a year for 1 year of college in 2008. Now, no, that's not mainly tuition, but that's because it isn't mainly tuition, right? The vast majority of the cost of attending college is the cost of sitting in the room, doing what you're doing right now, and spending time there versus spending time somewhere else, and managing to survive while you're doing that. His grants which should have come to the difference between $17,633 minus $425, instead came to a total of just over $7. That is his Pell Grant and his Wisconsin grant. In his first year of college, he was fortunate enough to get his Wisconsin grant. He filed his FAFSA in March before it ran out. The next year, he filed his FAFSA in March again, but by that point, the Wisconsin grant had run out. Okay, he did nothing wrong, but by simple fact that more people were eligible for the Wisconsin grant the following year, and the legislature did not increase funding, he was unable to get it. He had no idea that was going to happen. And that means that this young man from a family that absolutely should have been receiving a Pell Grant and clearly needed help with college was left to come up with more than $10,000 a year. Okay, how is he supposed to do that? Well, these days we say, well, that's what loans are for. But I want to remind you that when the Pell Grant program was created, it wasn't supposed to require loans for college for Pell recipients. It was created so that the people most in need of college and least able to afford it would never have to take a loan. In fact, most of the loans in this country were expanded and created through something called the Middle Income Student Assistance Act. They were designated for people who weren't getting the Pell. It was like the consolation prize. All right? So what does one do? I mean, we really started to wonder looking at these prices. What does a young person like Ian do faced with those prices? Well, the first thing you need to know is it's even worse than it looks, because that price is bogus. That number is wrong, and we've spent a bunch of time at the Wisconsin Hope Lab in the last several years trying to delineate all the ways in which there is error in that price. And it turns out that the parents who've paid for college and the students themselves who say all the time the bill is higher than what you're saying are pretty much right. Okay? So one reason is that Ian and many other people's expected family contribution is wrong because it fails to take into account the fact that the family was counting on Ian's income when he was working during high school, and when he went to college, they had lost income. Did not mean that they no longer needed it. So that meant that he ended up having to provide money back to his family. There are a whole bunch of people that have what look like zero expected family contributions. He's not one of them, but we had many of them. What's funny, though, is that when you actually run the formula with their financial aid data, you get a negative number. The negative tells us that the family will need a remittance in order to be whole while the child is in college. We truncate it. We chop it off at zero, and we ignore the negative number. Because what can you pay more for college than nothing? Well, actually, you could get a check back, right? But we don't allow that, so we truncate it at zero. This has huge consequences. It leads to students sitting in the aid office with the aid officer telling you, oh, we fulfilled all your need. And you saying, I don't have enough money, and them saying things like, perhaps you need some financial counseling, right? No, they had a negative, okay? That's number one. Number two, the living costs included in the estimate of what college costs are largely bogus. Now, ask yourself this. When you read on a university's website what it costs to live on campus, you know where that's coming from. That's the cost of their residence halls, right? But consider that only 13% of undergraduates around this country live on campus. 13. So the number that matters for most people is the number that says off campus. And there's two numbers. One is living alone, which means not with your family, or two, living with family. And then the college provides a number next to it. Where do they get the number? How is it that a college A and college B and college C get to decide what it costs to live in Dane County? They don't. They estimate it. And they face some very powerful incentives to underestimate it. Why would a college that is under pressure to look less expensive and to meet more of its students' financial need want to admit that it costs more money to live there? So instead of picking on Madison for a moment, I'll pick on the new school, New York City, where Chad graduated from. Okay? I was just there. I was brought in to give a talk. And I was thinking, what's going on at this private institution? Why am I here? The students are very upset. So I turned and I looked at their data. Since 2012, Based on the official statistics offered by the new school, with information advertised to those students and their families, it has become substantially less expensive to live in New York City. Okay? During a time in which rent rose at 3 times inflation, their estimate of what it costs to live in New York City went down by $1,000. Okay? This is a problem. It doesn't happen everywhere, but it seems to be happening at about 1/3 of colleges and universities. Okay. Another thing is, of course, if Ian had gone to a more expensive school or a school where there were more students from higher economic backgrounds, he probably would have faced other expenses as well. The expenses of trying to fit in with peers with more money than you. And just a preview of coming attractions, Nancy Kendall and I have just completed a 2-year-long ethnographic study of 4 of our public universities in the state, and we will soon be talking about the ways in which those higher income peers and the campuses that cater to them create cultures of unaffordability for students. So Ian's not alone, and his price is similar to the national average. Lest you're thinking, God, but the thing is, Wisconsin, we're just in worse shape than everybody else, and so, you're really talking about an outlier here. Actually, no. I spend a lot of time in the book explaining why and how this is so similar to the national, but I want to point out that Ian's price is higher than it is in much of the rest of Wisconsin. And so this is one of the pieces of conversation that we learn from the students and from their figures that I don't think we're talking enough about in this state. We hear all the time about how the state has disinvested in higher education and how it is a problem, of course, for any of us who think that education is an important thing, that the state has pulled back on those resources. What we don't talk about is how inequitably the state has pulled back. So let me show you how this works for Milwaukee. Okay, so the line you're used to seeing is this orange one, which shows you on a per student basis, right, how much the state has put in for higher education, state aid per student. And then the flip of that is if the state's not paying for it, then the student is paying for it through tuition. Okay, the share paid by the student. And so the line that we've commonly heard is, in my day, the state paid for most of college. Today, we pay for most of college, right? The thing is that the share has risen over 50%, the share paid by the students. It has risen over 50% at all of Wisconsin public higher education, and it started doing that, you can see in 03-04. But where do the students pay the most for their education? At UW-Milwaukee. Okay. Where do they pay the least? At UW-Madison. That is because on a per student basis, the state of Wisconsin puts in barely $5,500 per student in Milwaukee and over $12,000 per student here. Okay. Compare that to the demographics of those 2 institutions, and you'll quickly see that money does not follow disadvantage and does not go to compensate, right, for the needs of students who came up in the Milwaukee Public Schools, as an example, but rather seems to reward and continue to reward students who've already come with the greatest educational advances in the first place to the most selective institution and least accessible institution in the state. So Ian and his counterparts in Milwaukee paid a price for college that was about 19% higher than the students in the rest of the state. And put that in juxtaposition to what the Wisconsin idea means to students growing up in places like Milwaukee. It is the only ticket. I wish there was some other way out for them. But in the most segregated, one of the most impoverished cities in this country, nothing means more than the opportunity for higher education. And not only did Ian face these challenges, but the challenges got worse over time. So not only do students face a high price at the beginning, but the price rises with each passing year. They tend to think it will get better, that if only they stick it out, somebody will come for them and help them. Well, if they fail to refile their financial aid form because, like most people, they would assume you don't have to refile the same darn form that you filled out the first year when you're staying at the same darn school, then they lose their aid, okay? It's also the case of, as I described earlier, that state aid would simply run out. It is also the case that many institutions in the state, and especially the ones that have the most institutional aid, will often give it to first-year students. Not because they're being generous with first-year students, let's be clear. It's because they're using them to get them to come to the school. And then they swap out those grants for loans over time. Finally, Despite the rhetoric that financial aid's mainly being given based on family income, it is also containing performance requirements. And what that means is that even those Pell recipients are being asked to achieve certain grade point averages. And not only that, but to complete a certain segment, a certain fraction of their courses in order to keep their aid. Okay, now I know this sounds normal. Hardworking students should keep their money. Other people should get out. But consider that the typical grade point average required for Pell recipients to keep their aid is a 2.0, and a 2.0 happens to be the average GPA for Pell recipients. Huge numbers of people are coming in with economic and academic challenges to begin with, and then are being told they only get the money without those performance requirements for the first year. And if they don't meet those benchmarks by the end of the first year, they'll start to have the money taken away from them, as if that will improve their odds of completing college. Not only that, but things that most of us do, like when your grades are struggling and you realize that you signed up for too many classes, right? One young woman that we studied, Chloe Johnson, signed up for 5 classes and tried to work 2 jobs at the same time. She did this because she faced such a high price she didn't have any choice. Well, she rightly figured out halfway through the semester that she couldn't make it. So she wanted to drop a class, but if she dropped the class in combination with her already lower GPA, she would be placed on academic probation for her financial aid, which is exactly what happened, which totally freaked her out and caused her to leave school, right? So at the Community College of Philadelphia, which is now my neighbor, 40% of Pell Grant recipients in their first year of college are in trouble with satisfactory academic progress, which basically means that the money that the institution is also counting on as a revenue stream, just like all of our schools do, is in jeopardy. So I hope it's clear by now that not only is this a system that would have trouble being effective, it also has trouble being trusted. This is a system that sets people up to fail and takes a hard look at them when they do. And it is also very, very slow, which is part of the trust issue. Because when you need money, right, the people you trust the most are the ones who will deliver the fastest. Financial aid says, hey, you need a student loan and you filled out the paperwork for it in October? Good, we'll get you that money by December, right? That's well after the rent's due. So that's another huge problem. So what do students do? Well, I decided to break out for you the strategies, the coping strategies by Milwaukee versus the rest of Wisconsin so that you can really see what's happening here. So first, while the Pell program was supposed to not mean that anyone would need to take a loan, you can see that the majority of students, this is in their first year of college, actually did in fact have to take a loan. And that was especially true in Milwaukee. Second, you can also see that work is not working as you might expect. So lots of people speak very fondly about work-study programs. I did employ work-study students here at UW-Madison. But work-study is only available in very limited amounts of money, and it is allocated in a very strange way. So today, as I show in the book, only 1 in 10 students who are eligible, who should be eligible for work-study because they're on the Pell Grant, are getting any work-study funding at all if they're at public colleges and universities. We have, at Wisconsin, Madison, enough money for every single work-study student, or at least we did last I looked, while in Milwaukee, they only have enough money for 1 in 10 of their work-study students. That's creating this disparity. And one of the reasons is that the work-study funding formula, which flows to institutions and not students, rewards institutions based on their proximity to Plymouth Rock. You heard me, Plymouth Rock. You know where that is? What's going on? It's the age of the institution. The age of the institution. So that's why UW-Madison, despite having barely 10% Pell recipients, gets more money than UW-Milwaukee, which has about 30%. Okay? Now let's look at work. I have heard from everybody, everywhere, including the people I sat next to on the plane, that they worked in college and our students should too. I worked in college. I worked 40 hours a week as a waitress. And I've become increasingly grateful to that restaurant manager who gave me those hours. Because what students today are facing is a lack of work. The opportunities are not there. The reason you don't see 100% of these students working is that they often can't find work. That's a huge change. That's the real difference. It's not just that you'd have to work so many hours, incredible numbers of hours to cover these prices. It's that you couldn't even get the hours if you wanted it. Not only does work not pay on an hourly basis, employers are dividing the shifts across multiple people. We've got students at this institution who are working the graveyard shift at the grocery stores to try to earn extra money on an hourly basis, and then getting up in the morning to try to go to class. Well, not getting up, they never went to bed. Okay, this is an unbelievable issue that has gotten no attention. The Bureau of Labor Statistics regularly says that a person who is seeking work but isn't employed currently is nonetheless in the labor market. In all studies of undergraduates, they are simply counted as not working, and the assumption is they don't want to. Finally, you might think if things get bad, students will find help, especially these very impoverished students, so we will turn to the social safety net, and that will be there for them because, they ought to be able to get cash assistance or food stamps or housing support or something. Unfortunately, that does not appear to be true. So this was the study that initiated what has become a major initiative through the Wisconsin Hope Lab of trying to understand how it is that we appear to have substantial amounts of students going through housing and food insecurity while they are in college. These are 2008 numbers. There have been a bunch of studies that we've done since. We currently have a study in the field, the biggest one yet, at 72 colleges and universities around the country that has already enrolled more than 30,000 students in that study. And Katie Broten's sitting back there. She's in the Department of Sociology, and her dissertation is on material hardship in higher education. I got to tell you, in 2008, I had no idea that's where we were headed. I thought we'd be hearing about students who could afford textbooks. I thought I'd be hearing about students not liking the price of iClickers. I did not expect to have one of my research assistants come back and tell me that she was really upset because a young woman, age 18, had looked her in the eye and said, "You know what's tough about college? I'm hungry." She hadn't eaten in 2 days. It is very hard to sit in a classroom while other people snack and other people are okay and you've had nothing to eat. Okay? We started hearing about homelessness. I started talking about this on the road. I got questions. Maybe that's a Wisconsin thing. Like we don't take care of our own. Come on. So we've been all over the country. The latest estimate that we got was that 13% of community college students are homeless. I got a survey in the other day from Massachusetts. Their estimate just came back at 19%. Okay, this is happening. And one of the reasons it's happening, frankly, if we're being honest with ourselves, is that students are spreading themselves as thin as they possibly can. Not on purpose, but because they have to. Students who don't even have enough money for themselves are sending money home to their families because their families are also not okay. So this crisis has happened with college pricing at a time when income has stagnated or fallen, right? The poverty rate might be declining, but it doesn't feel more okay to families yet. And so for that combination to occur, where the student is suffering and the family is suffering at the same time, it really changes for that family what it means for that student to be in college. Oh, sorry. Okay, so safety net, well, I'm in Wisconsin, so, Tommy Thompson, et cetera. There's hardly a safety net left for these folks, and Wisconsin had a lot to do with that. I'll just give you one core example. Food stamps, right? It used to be the case that if you couldn't afford to eat, you would get food stamps, and food stamps would help you. These days, unless you are a parent, in order to get food stamps, you have to work 20 hours a week. Now, I just showed you that undergraduates even have a hard time getting enough hours. Setting aside the major issue of it's not a good idea to work 20 hours a week while you're in college, especially if you're trying to finish your degree. But with very few exceptions, college students cannot get food stamps without meeting that work requirement. And the really big irony is that the escape clause for them is supposed to be the work-study program. It's supposed to be that if you need food stamps, you get in the work-study program. Because you're in the work-study program, you get out of the work requirement associated with food stamps. Except they clearly don't understand the work-study program, right? And how badly that's failing. So we track those students, all of whom were pursuing Wisconsin public higher education with all of its promises about the future and what it could bring for them and their families. And these are the figures. Half of them completed degrees. The rates for community colleges, which is I'm calling our UW colleges and our technical colleges was a bit higher, okay? And that's partly because, a bit higher than the national average, by the way, and that's because of the strength of our technical colleges. They do have higher completion rates than the national average. But a whole bunch of people ended up leaving college with absolutely nothing in their hands except for debt. And I think that's the real story with student debt in this country. It isn't about six figures. It isn't about $200,000. It isn't about people who finished law school, right? No disrespect to them, but they got degrees. And it's hard to repay the money, but they probably will be able to do so. Not without sacrifice, but they'll be able to do it. There are people defaulting on their loans and ruining their credit and ruining their lives all over this country on amounts of money less than $10,000. And that's because they've had to borrow for the first year of college at institutions that we knew were already risky. Some of them were for-profits, and some of them were community colleges where you go because you're not sure you can do college, where you go because you don't have money. And yet, you can see with these prices here in Wisconsin and elsewhere throughout the country, you can't afford to be in college without taking loans. So it's not a surprise that they don't complete. It's a surprise that the price is helping drive them out and that they end up with debt that they should never have had in the first place, that was not predicted by federal policy. Would more grant aid have helped? Well, this is what we aim to find out by engaging with the mortgages, and I'll give you the punchline. The short version of this is, yes, it helped a little bit. The mortgages gave more money to the students at the four-year institutions, and it increased their rates of degree completion over 4 years, bachelor's degree completion, from about 16% over 4 years to 21%, leaving still the majority of them not getting what they needed. Did this mean they didn't need money? I think we've got pretty good evidence that that's not the case. It's not that financial aid didn't matter to them and that more money wouldn't have helped. It was the way the financial aid was delivered and the extent to which it fell short. And that's especially evident when we look at the two-year college students. The mortgages did what so many people do. They gave less money to the two-year college students under the assumption that they needed less money. So their grant was $1,800 instead of $3,500 a year. But the net price, the price tag that students were left with after the mortgage grant, was over $8,000 a year. So even with the additional private money, they were still left to come up with more than they could handle, and it didn't end up having an impact. So I think those are the words I would use for today's system. They are not kind, and it was hard for me to say them originally, because I'm very fearful of dismantling a system without replacing it with something else that works. I learned a lot from working with the legislature in this state. Senator Fred Risser stopped me once when I was just about to push for a state financial aid, state work study program, because he pointed out to me that the funding for the state work study program I wanted to create would be taken directly from the Wisconsin grant. Right? When that's the game we're playing, this is very, very hard to do. But we can do better than this. And so to me, what the Wisconsin idea has meant in terms of fulfilling that in my life is trying to honor what these Wisconsin students have taught me and taught my team members and do better than this. Because if we're going to tell them that education matters, then we need to give them a price that will allow them to access it. If we're going to tell them to get academically prepared for college, then we need to have them obtain that education and be met with a price that allows them to move forward. I've got a long list of things that we can do, okay? I'm just going to show you that. I'm not going to talk you through all of it. I'm happy to do that in Q&A. Chapter 10 of my book is a substantial discussion of the policy and practice implications here. I've been working on developing these in many ways, and I can tell you that my first thing on my agenda tomorrow morning, and it's frankly already started, is to work with the new administration to figure out how, number one, to address living expenses, okay? We have to stop talking about tuition all the time, okay? It's not the main cost that these students face. We can address living expenses. There are so many ways to do it, and some of this goes way beyond typical higher education policy. The fight for 15 is all about college affordability. The fight to fix the SNAP program is all about college affordability. Right? Affordable housing discussions are all about college affordability. All of these things need to be tied together. But we also need to recognize that there's a whole lot of people being failed entirely by the current system. Not only are these Pell recipients not all right, but all the people who can't get to be Pell recipients but still need money are not all right. First on that list, of course, is the middle class. The middle class is not okay. Anybody who tries to claim that giving any subsidy to the middle class is a waste of money doesn't understand how they too are being locked out of higher education, how their students too are dropping out of college. But let us not forget all of the undocumented students who can't complete the FAFSA, or all of the students who are LGBTQ or otherwise homeless or disowned, who are told that they don't qualify for more money because their parents' income is being counted against them. Right? This is creating disruptions in people's lives and families, etc. And we need a system that doesn't ask so much of the most vulnerable people. So one option that I've laid out there is what I call the first degree for free. It's not called free community college. It's not called just free public higher education, because I'm aiming for something that I think is achievable yet ambitious. Making the associate degree free, that's the first degree, right? And it ought to be the first degree that even institutions like this one grant. Because there are going to be reasons that people take time off after those first couple years, and there's no reason they shouldn't at least walk away with the associate's degree in hand. Everybody who took a master's on the way to the PhD, okay? It matters. Sometimes you end up ABD for a while, okay? So this, I think, is the way to begin. And I think that we need to make it free and high quality. I do not believe the word free immediately implies bad. Okay, in fact, I just put out a piece reviewing all the social psychological literature on the word free, and it doesn't mean bad. Most people, it actually means good things because they can get it. However, and this is so important for Wisconsin public higher education, we need to provide the resources to drive the price down. The resources have to go to the institutions so that they can cover the costs of providing a quality education. And one problem that we have is we don't really know what those resources are and what they cost. So ask yourself, can UW-Milwaukee function with $5,500 of support on a per-student basis to educate largely impoverished, largely first-generation students? You're probably saying no, but what is the right number? If we gave them what UW-Madison students are getting, would they be okay? And does it cost $12,000 or $14,000 a year or more, $20,000, $30,000 a year to educate students at the post-secondary level who were well educated at the secondary level, right? Harvard brags that it spends $60,000 per student. What are they giving them? And is it necessary? And should we give it to everybody? Or maybe what we need to do is fix the system so that things flow in the right direction and follow the need. You all are considering, well, you all have been dealing with for a while a governor who believes that freezing tuition makes college affordable. And so I will say free, not freeze. Fund the freeze. Sure, it's called appropriations, all right? You cannot reduce the quality and resources of the institutions that the students are attending such that it isn't even worth attending if you make it affordable. Also, by the way, freezing tuition doesn't do anything about all of these other costs that continue to rise. And when you don't increase the need-based financial grant for the state, it buys less and less every year. So it is really quite a joke to claim that tuition freezes make college affordable. Finally, I want to tell you that we're known here at UW-Madison for our underfunding of faculty. I moved to a new institution. I got a real adult salary. And I finally started to think about these students and how we could immediately help them. I'm tired of collecting sad stories and working on federal policy and not being able to change lives right now. So together with 5 incredible colleagues, we've created something called the FAST Fund. And instead of giving money to college administrators to give out, who tend to not do things very quickly because they do things by committee, we are giving out these resources directly to the faculty and the teachers. And they are giving the money directly to the students as they need it, as quickly as possible. And the designees of the FAST Fund in this very first year, one is the Madison Metropolitan School District. So one of the vice principals in this district is distributing this money. She's a teacher and a vice principal. Number 2 is a faculty member at Milwaukee Area Technical College who has already been out there helping tons of students who have needs for $100, $500. This is emergency aid. And a faculty member at Bunker Hill Community College in Boston who just decided to buy 2,000 Cliff Bars and give them out to teachers in all the classrooms to feed students who they can tell have not eaten before they came to class. It's something else that we can do, and it's direct. And one of the reasons that I'm doing it is not just to feel better about things. but frankly to show that we can do things, and we can do them in fast, effective ways. Even in private philanthropy, we can do better than what we're doing right now. So I'm going to stop there, and if you do want the book, please know that all of my proceeds from this book have been donated to the Wisconsin Hope Lab to help finance the research that goes into creating findings like these that hopefully will be used to advance policy going forward. And I thank you for your time and attention.